Before we begin, you need to hear this clearly. More stroke survivors die from the second stroke, not the first. And the second one often begins in the quietest moment of the day, with a meal that looks harmless. Not stress, not genetics, not fate, but a meal. Something swallowed in seconds that sets off a biological chain reaction you never feel until it is too late. A stroke is like flipping a light switch. One moment, everything is bright. The next, darkness. It does not care about your weekend plans. It does not care how healthy you feel right now. Every 40 seconds in the United States, someone has a stroke. By the time you finish this introduction, another life will have changed forever. But the part almost no one is told is this. While genetics matter, the vast majority of strokes are not accidents. They build slowly, silently, invisibly. And today, you are not getting a list of foods. You are getting a biological strategy, a map of how to bulletproof the brain. But first, you need to see how even breakfast can act like a ticking time bomb. To understand the danger, you need to meet Robert. Robert is 55, an architect, sharp, hard-working, and seemingly healthy. He wakes up early, drinks his coffee, gets to work on time. He has no headaches, no dizziness, nothing unusual at all. And like millions of people, he enjoys a good steak dinner. But inside Robert, something is building, slowly tightening its grip around his future. Think of the vessels feeding your brain as garden hoses. Healthy hoses are flexible and smooth, letting water flow easily. But after decades of processed foods and saturated fats, two things happen. The pressure inside the hose begins to rise. Hypertension, the #1 risk factor for stroke. And the walls inside that hose begin to collect plaque. One morning, a tiny piece of that plaque breaks off. It drifts through his bloodstream, sails into a narrowing artery deep inside his brain, and gets stuck. Blood stops, oxygen stops, brain cells begin to die. An ischemic stroke, the nightmare scenario. But here's the truth. Most strokes don't start like this. Some start without a single symptom, and many happen to people far younger than Robert. Let me take you somewhere most people never go, into the world of silent strokes. Silent strokes are brain injuries with no obvious symptoms, no facial drooping, no slurred speech, no paralysis. But MRI scans reveal the truth. Tiny scars, dead tissue, accumulating over years. For every visible stroke, there are 10 to 14 silent ones. They chip away at memory, decision-making, balance, mood. People blame aging, when in reality, these tiny infarcts are quietly carving away pieces of the mind. And then there are young strokes, a crisis growing in silence. Strokes among adults aged 18 to 44 have risen dramatically. Strokes in adults aged 45 to 64 are climbing too. The modern stroke patient is no longer only the elderly man with decades of atherosclerosis. It is the 32-year-old experiencing a carotid artery tear misdiagnosed as a migraine. It is the young professional collapsing in a parking lot with no warning. It is the generation raised on ultra-processed food, chronic inflammation, and silent hypertension no one checks for. This is the backdrop of the crisis we are facing. Now, Let's rewind the chemistry in Robert's body, because this is where prevention becomes power. Most people think preventing a stroke begins with cutting salt, but salt was never Robert's real enemy. Sodium acts like a sponge, pulling water into the bloodstream, raising pressure. But the real breakthrough happens not when you cut sodium, but when you increase potassium. Potassium is the biological antidote to sodium. It forces your kidneys to dump excess salt. It relaxes the muscles lining your arteries. Robert's mistake was eating food high in sodium and nearly void of potassium. To fix this, he needs an upgraded DASH-style approach, around 4,700 milligrams of potassium daily, unless restricted by kidney disease. Not from pills. Let's pause here for a second and do the math, because 4,700 milligrams is a huge number. Most people think, I'll just eat a banana. But an average banana only has about 420 milligrams of potassium. To hit Robert's target, he would need to eat 11 bananas every single day. That is not a strategy. That is a sugar overdose. So what does a real potassium strategy look like? It looks like a baked potato with the skin on, providing nearly 900 milligrams, double that of a banana. It looks like a single cup of cooked spinach, giving you over 800 milligrams. It looks like a cup of white beans, delivering a massive 1,000 milligrams in one serving. And half an avocado adds another 480. By simply combining these real foods, Robert hits his target effortlessly, without supplements and without calculating every bite. Balancing sodium and potassium is like installing a pressure release valve inside your blood vessels. But lowering pressure isn't enough. There's a twist in this story, and it happens in the gut. When Robert eats red meat, eggs, or processed foods, certain gut bacteria convert nutrients into TMAO. His liver transforms that gas into TMAO, a compound associated with stickier platelets, faster clot formation, and unstable arterial plaque. TMAO isn't a poison, but elevated levels tip the blood toward danger. Robert never imagined his risk wasn't just in his arteries, but inside his gut. This is where diet stops being good or bad and becomes pure chemistry. And chemistry always has consequences. Now we go deeper, into the delicate inner lining of your vessels, the endothelium. It is not wallpaper. It is one of the most important organs in your body. It releases nitric oxide, a gas that widens arteries, prevents clots, and keeps your blood flowing smoothly. But deep-fried foods, trans fats, and refined sugars scorch this lining. They shut down nitric oxide production at the source. To restore it, Robert needs nitrates from beets, rocket, and dark leafy greens. His body converts these into nitric oxide, the same mechanism elite athletes use to increase blood flow. He adds omega-3s from salmon and sardines, integrating them into his vessel walls, making them flexible instead of brittle. Let me simplify this part. Inside your arteries is a tiny machine called NOS. Its job is to make nitric oxide. But oxidative stress destroys a fragile helper molecule called BH4. When BH4 disappears, the machine breaks. Instead of producing protective gas, it produces a destructive particle called superoxide. That particle rips into your vessel walls from the inside. Each processed meal, each sugar-heavy dessert, each week of high blood pressure pushed Robert closer to that moment. But there's an even deeper story, one that lives not in the arteries, but in the brain's final line of defense. The blood-brain barrier, a microscopic shield that protects your neural tissue from toxins, inflammation, and unstable molecules. When chronic inflammation builds, especially from the gut, this barrier begins to leak. Tiny cracks form in the shield. Inflammatory molecules slip through. This makes the brain more vulnerable to stroke, memory loss, mood changes, and vascular dementia. The foods Robert ate didn't just raise his blood pressure, they weakened the walls that protect his brain itself. Now, let's go back to where the story becomes even more surprising. The trillions of bacteria living in your gut are not bystanders. They are decision makers. They influence inflammation, clot formation, and even cognitive function. When you feed them soluble fiber, oats, flax seeds, berries, legumes, they create short-chain fatty acids like butyrate. Butyrate strengthens the gut barrier, reduces inflammation, and protects the blood-brain barrier. But if your diet is low in fiber, gut bacteria starve. They begin eating the mucus lining of your gut. This leaks inflammatory molecules directly into the bloodstream, damaging the arteries feeding your brain. There is more. Some studies show a specific bacterium, Streptococcus aeruginosus, linked to higher stroke risk. It looks harmless in the mouth, but when it migrates to the gut, it becomes a spark in a room full of gasoline. Gut health is brain health. Gut inflammation is vascular inflammation. Stroke is not a brain problem, it is a whole body problem. Now that you understand the biology, let's step back and look at the bigger picture. Because Robert doesn't just need foods. He needs a pattern, a blueprint, a long-term architecture for the way he eats. And that brings us to the 3 master diets of stroke prevention. First, the Mediterranean diet, the most studied pattern for cardiovascular protection. It's built on olive oil, nuts, vegetables, fruit, whole grains, and fish, with very limited red meat. It lowers inflammation, improves blood flow, reduces plaque, and decreases the risk of major cardiovascular events by about 30%. Second, the DASH diet, engineered specifically to lower blood pressure. It's built on fruits, vegetables, low-fat dairy, legumes, and strictly limited sodium. Its effect on blood pressure is often equal to medication. And third, the MIND diet, the blueprint for brain preservation. The MIND diet is unique because it specifically isolates the foods that protect the brain from neurodegeneration. It creates a category called brain-healthy food groups. And at the top of that list are 2 specific items: green leafy vegetables and berries. Unlike other fruit, berries, specifically blueberries and strawberries, are packed with flavonoids that have been proven to delay cognitive aging by up to 2.5 years. The MIND diet doesn't just ask you to eat them occasionally. It prescribes them as medicine. at least 2 servings a week. It slows cognitive decline, strengthens the brain's resilience, and is especially powerful for stroke survivors trying to prevent recurrence. When you combine the Mediterranean diet's anti-inflammatory power with Dash's blood pressure control and Mind's neuroprotective science, you get the strongest known dietary defense against stroke. This is not theory. It is one of the most evidence-backed strategies in modern nutrition. So now, let's return to Robert. Let's look at his new plate, a plate that reflects everything you've just learned. It's no longer a steak dominating half the dish. It's grilled salmon for omega-3s, a pile of spinach and beets for nitric oxide, black beans and lentils for potassium, magnesium, and fiber, a handful of walnuts for healthy fats to nourish his microbiome, and extra virgin olive oil drizzled on his vegetables, delivering polyphenols that calm inflammation. This is not restriction. This is abundance with purpose. Robert made these changes slowly, realistically. He retrained his palate away from processed sugar and toward real food. 6 months later, his blood pressure dropped. His cholesterol shifted. Inflammation markers improved. The ticking clock inside his arteries slowed. He didn't just avoid a stroke. He reclaimed his future. The best diet for stroke prevention is not a temporary fix. It is a lifelong partnership with your blood vessels. But even with the best prevention, vigilance is essential. Please remember the acronym FAST. Face drooping, arm weakness, speech difficulty. Time to call emergency services. If you ever see these signs, do not wait. If this deep dive helped you, please share it with someone you love. It might be the most important link they ever open. And if you'd like more guidance on lowering blood pressure naturally, there is a complete guide linked below. Click subscribe to join our community, dedicated to mastering your health. Take care of your vessels, and they will take care of you.